All right, get your pad and pencils ready. We have the XFL playoffs, break down the scenarios, how it's all going to work. It gets a little confusing, so let's get right into it. So, first up, of course, the XFL 10-game regular season is entering its final stages as the playoff picture is starting to take shape with the top two teams from each division making the playoffs. Let's break down the scenarios for each team in the North and in the South. So, first, your DC Defenders. They secure home field advantage in the North Division Championship. The DC Defenders already clinched a playoff spot, and now they have home field advantage in the North Division Championship. St. Louis and Seattle Sea Dragons. This is where it gets tricky. So the Battlehawks can secure the second playoff spot in the North Division by winning their final game against the Orlando Guardians and a Sea Dragons loss, or a win and the best combined rank tiebreakers. We'll get to that in a second. Seattle Sea Dragons can secure a second playoff spot in the North Division by winning their final game against the Vegas Vipers and hoping that St. Louis loses their game against the Guardians. And there's a bunch of tiebreakers, of course. The Vegas Vipers are eliminated. They're at 2-7. So here is the breakdown. Mike Mitchell has it all. He says the final XFL tiebreakers after combing the rankings is point differential and net points. So basically, the XFL released their playoff scenarios for Week 10, and we have them all right here. So below are the current Battlehawk playoff scenarios through Rule 4 and the XFL tiebreakers. So first, St. Louis wins, Seattle loses, St. Louis is in the playoffs. If St. Louis loses and Seattle wins, Seattle is in the playoffs. Pretty simple. So a loss and a win and a loss, you get the idea. If St. Louis and Seattle loses, St. Louis is in the playoffs as our fourth loss in a non-division matchup, Orlando, while Seattle would have 4 division losses, with DC with 2, St. Louis, and Vegas. So there you have it. So if both teams loses, St. Louis is in the playoffs as the fourth loss is a non-divisional matchup. So the reason is Seattle lost 4 divisional games, St. Louis did not. Now, if St. Louis and Seattle wins, here is where the craziness comes down to play. St. Louis wins, Seattle wins. St. Louis needs to score 19 more points versus Orlando than Seattle scores against Vegas. And St. Louis must still rank first in total points against to win the tiebreaker 4, which is best combined ranking among division teams in points, scores, and points allowed. So basically, if St. Louis and Seattle win, St. Louis needs to run up the score. Seattle needs to try to run up. Not only do they need to try to win, but St. Louis really needs to run up the score. So if you're not tuning in, that's why people were getting a little pissed because Seattle kicked that field goal at the end of the game, and they were like, why did you do that? And the fans were booing against St. Louis. Well, that's why that is the thing that's going on with them. Now, for the South Division, Houston Roughnecks, 6-3, secure home field advantage. They are the South Division champions. They clinched the playoff spot and home field advantage, which their win this past weekend. Arlington Renegades can secure the second playoff spot if the South Division by winning their final game against the Houston Roughnecks. If they lose, they still make the playoff if San Antonio Brahmas lose their final game against the DC Defenders. The Brahmas can secure the second playoff spot in the South by winning their final game against the DC Defenders and hoping for an Arlington Renegades loss against the Houston Roughnecks. In the event of the tiebreaker in the standings, the Brahmas needs to have a better division win-loss percentage or strength of victory. In comes those kind of tiebreakers again for the Brahmas, but it's more clear. Basically, the Brahmas need to win, Arlington needs to lose, and then Brahmas, I don't think they have to worry about running up the score. I think that San Antonio is in the game. We have the tiebreaker rules all here. Mike Mitchell even talked about, basically talking about the tiebreakers, basically 4 and 5. We had to go all the way down there to get that. Oh, and by the way, of course, Orlando Guardians are out of it at 1-8. So really the exciting thing is going to come down to with 1 week left in the regular season, there's still much to be decided. The Battlehawks, Sea Dragons, Renegades, and Brahmas all have a shot in making the playoffs. That's 4 teams out of the 8 are still in the playoff hunt, which makes this whole weekend worth of games interesting. There's no kind of mail it in. No one cares about the game. They all kind of have some kind of touching in the playoff points. But the team's fate depends on their performance and the outcomes. Win, and you're in. You lose, you could be all out. So you got to tune in for the final week of XFL action as the playoff picture gets clearer, my friends. This is going to be a great weekend of games in the XFL.